Hi everyone. Thanks for joining our Parenting Now webinar, Baby Sleep and Settling 6 to 12 Months. My name's Anne and I work at the Parenting Research Centre. Our webinar is being held on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that our webinar attendees are participating from, and I pay respect to the Wurundjeri elders and elders from other communities past and present. And I extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us here tonight. We'll be talking about some ideas for sleep and settling in your child, including what to expect in relation to sleep at this age and routines, practices and tips. The webinar will go for about 40 minutes with time afterwards for a question and answer session. I'd also like to acknowledge the Department of Education and Training Victoria who are supporting these webinar presentations, which were developed by the Parenting Research Centre and are being hosted by raisingchildren.net.au. So I have a few housekeeping pointers as we get underway. What you'll see on your screen is a main view of the webinar window, which will show Di and I and the slides. And sometimes you'll just see the slides. And on the left is the chat room. And you can use the chat room at any time, and please do, and some of you have been quite busy in there already tonight, talking about your babies and children's on laps and babies in cots. The only thing to remember is that we can't hear you, so if you want to ask us a question, you'll have to remember to type it into the box. And with us tonight also is Kim in the chat room, and she'll be helping out with any of your tech queries or other things that perhaps Di and I can't help you with. The webinar experience is best from a laptop or a computer. It's a bit more limited from your smartphone or your tablet. If you need to access tech help, perhaps try to close down any other programs that might be draining your computer memory or internet connection. And we've got a help number in Sydney that you can call anywhere, 1800 733 416. Or you could try refreshing your web page or turning off the video to stabilise it. So if you miss something tonight or your babies wake up and called away, don't worry, we're recording tonight's session and you'll be able to view the presentation at a later date. Links will be sent to anyone who enrolled for the webinar. I'm just showing you on screen some helplines and hotlines. These are also available on the Raising Children Network website. If anything that we discuss tonight upsets you, you could contact some of these numbers on your screen. It's also worth explaining tonight that we're just offering general information, not specific advice for your child. So if you need some extra support, your maternal and child health nurse or perhaps your GP is the best place to start. Just a reminder who this webinar is for. It's for parents and carers of children aged 6 to 12 months who are looking for information and help around baby sleep and settling, or if you've got a baby that's younger than that or perhaps a bit older that maybe you might think that some of the tips could be helpful. But generally it's aimed at parents of babies about that age. Correct. Yep. Okay. I'd like to introduce Di. Di is a registered nurse at the Royal Children's Hospital, and she has a lot of experience in parenting support, including training professionals. And Di and I have worked together quite a bit on some sleep articles for Raising Children Network. And I have often told Di that I wish that she'd been around when my kids were young, because I think you'll get a lot of support from Di tonight, lots of good information.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay. So we're going to start tonight with just a quick poll, just to get everybody, I guess, connecting with the webinar. We'd like to know how old your baby is. I think if I do this, it should be on screen. I'm going to start the poll now. Okay, so I think everyone is already in and telling us how old their babies are, which is great for you to know, I guess, Di, because then you know.
It does help, yeah.
Yep. questions that the audience are where they're at, and we seem to be really right in the middle. We've got about 59% of you at 6 to 9 months. Some very little babies in there, 0 to 3 months, but that's not so many of you, 2%, and then 17% around the other sort of 3 to 6, 9 to 12 months. Okay. Okay, I'm going to hand over to you, Di. Okay.
So, thanks, Anne, very much for your introduction. Well, tonight we're going to really look at your children's development between 6 to 12 months, and how this development and what else is happening in the child's life actually relates to their sleep. So that's one of the things that we'll be really focusing on to start with. We're looking at routines and how to establish routines. We're looking also at what you can do if things aren't working well, and hopefully we'll also be having some questions and answers as we go through, and we're sort of focusing on the chat room as we go a bit. Yep. And also on the questions that were raised as part of the registration. Yep. So we're really aware that there's lots of interest out there in looking to try and address a lot of wakefulness at night, from what we can see, between 6 to 12 months, and what you can do. I'll be upfront with you. I don't have answers for all of this, because a lot of your problems are quite specific, but we'll try with the general overview to give you an idea and the information you need to feel a bit more confident in addressing sleep issues with your children, and hopefully point you in the right direction. So let's look at what is happening for babies at this time. So what do babies really need to ensure that they can sleep? First of all, they need to feel safe and feel nurtured. And I know this sounds like something very simple, but it's something that takes a while to establish, and it's how you establish your relationship with your baby, how you get to know them and know what they like and know what makes them feel good. But it also is the baby getting to know you. It's not a one-way relationship. Your baby is also driving the relationship. And sometimes those calling out during the night is about the relationship and about wanting to know where you are. And in all reality, they like your company. That's who they want. So it's sort of being aware of the relationship and the interactions that occur in forming that relationship in the first 6 months, and how you're continuing to build on it now in the next 6. It's about telling your baby that they're loved and that you protect them, and that these nurturing experiences are really fundamental to their ongoing healthy development. So what's happening overall around sleep? So generally babies in the 6 to 12 months period sleep around 14 hours a day in a 24-hour period. And when I talk about the 24-hour period, I mean 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when you're looking at your baby's sleep, don't think about daytime and nighttime. Look at the 24 hours. So during the period between 6 to 12 months, babies will sleep around 14 hours in that 24-hour period. But there'll be some babies that only sleep for 9 hours during that 24-hour period, which isn't quite enough. So generally we're wanting them to sleep at least between 10. Some babies will sleep even longer than 14 hours during that 24-hour period. Most babies at this time still have naps, and they usually have around 2 naps a day. Some babies will have 3. Some naps will last from 1 to 2 hours. Others will be much shorter, between 30 to 40 minutes. And about a quarter of babies at this time will wake after 30 to 40 minutes, which is at the end of the first sleep cycle. And that is one of the issues that we'll address a bit later on, is what to do if your baby's waking after 40 minutes. some babies will be fine after 40-minute nap. And again, it's about really looking at your baby and working out, are they, how are they? Are they happy and content, or are they still a bit irritable and tired? So we'll look at what to do when your baby wakes after a 40-minute cycle a bit later on.
I'm really glad that you covered this straight up, Di, because I think one of the most common questions that we had in the pre-registration answers was how much sleep does my baby need?
Yeah.
And the people attending who perhaps would like a bit more information or would like to see it written down, we do have a great article on raisingchildren.net.au, but also what I'm picking up from what you're saying, Di, is that it's a guideline, isn't it? It's just...
It is. There's a big variation. I mean, if we looked at all of you, all the adults that have rung in tonight, all the parents that have rung in tonight, and I asked you how much sleep you had, perhaps before you had babies, but you would have all had different amounts of sleep. It's a very individual need, but it's working out how much sleep your baby needs to function well. So although there's guidelines there, it's again around really being aware and understanding and being observant of your baby and working out, are they actually doing okay with the amount of sleep they're getting? Are they playing? Are they interested in their world? Are they eating well and feeding well? So all those things will tell you whether your baby is getting enough sleep. If your baby's irritable or disinterested or clingy, generally they're sort of telling you that actually I'm still tired. So it's really important to observe your baby well and to be present, to take time to really observe them. We're all in a big rush at times these days, and it's often we don't take the time to really observe. But if you observe your baby and really get to understand them, it will make it so much easier in responding well to their needs. So most babies are ready for bed of an evening around between 6 and 10 p.m, but usually try and get them to sleep a bit earlier than 10 p.m. if possible. Some babies take most babies take around 30 minutes to get to sleep. Other babies don't, but again, it's a very individual thing. And many babies that wake during the night at this age will still need an adult to settle them back to sleep. It's around developing their capacity to get themselves back to sleep, to resettle without an adult. That is based on brain development, but also on the relationship and the baby's temperament. There's a lot of things that impact whether your baby can get themselves back to sleep. And we know that about 1 in 10 babies will wake during the night at least 3 to 4 times during this period. So it's still common for babies to be waking during the night. For some parents, it's not an issue if your baby wakes frequently. For others, it's a bit of a nightmare because, especially if you're trying to return to work, then the fatigue of broken sleep makes that very, very difficult. So we'll look at fatigue a bit later on. And the interesting thing, and a lot of you have rung in for lots of different reasons, but more than a third of parents at this time say they have problems with their baby's sleep. So it may not help you feel much better, but don't feel alone. This is a very common experience. It has nothing to do with feeling like a failure as a parent. It is just, it's hard work. It's hard work around really understanding what's going on for your child's sleep, but also in how to manage or adjust to the constant changes that happen, especially between 6 to 12 months. So we'll go on and have a think about what else happens at this time. Most of you, or the parents that are out there of the 6 to 12 months, will probably be seeing lots of physical changes happening in your baby. They're often starting to crawl around 6 months. Some are starting to walk around furniture, and certainly by 12 months most children are able to pull themselves up and walk around furniture. So they're starting to experience big changes in their world. They're starting to see lots of different things happening. And this has emotional changes for these babies as well. We talk about babies developing their self-regulation at this time, but this often, for many babies, this can happen at a different rate and in different ways. Being able to resettle themselves back to sleep is, again, a skill around self-soothing. But if your baby's more reactive or more intense, then it may be much more challenging for him or her to soothe themselves. These babies often need a lot more help to calm and settle. Babies who are less reactive, or not quite so sensitive, tend to handle minor stresses better. They won't respond so much to loud noises, and they often find it easier to fall asleep on their own. The thing about babies at around 6 months is they develop the ability to keep themselves awake. So part of their brain development is around learning to keep themselves awake.
We had that a lot with some of the comments at the registration phase with children fighting sleep.
Yes.
Quite a few about what to do if your child fights sleep. I guess that's part of learning to keep yourself awake, isn't it?
It is. So it's part of natural, the natural progression of part of development itself is that that learning to keep yourself awake. And especially now that they're up and they're more mobile and they're starting to babble and make different sounds, these are all very exciting skills for your baby. I mean, we get excited watching it, but it's also exciting for them. And this often means that the babies don't really want to go to sleep. So they're often, and especially when they wake during the night, they think, oh, well, actually I might stay up for a while and play, which is not really what we want.
It's not the right time.
So it's about knowing how to respond if you've got a baby that is waking like that, who's just feeling fairly sociable. And it's about knowing to keep calm and to have probably as little interaction as possible at that time, so you're not actually stimulating them. If they're really just waking to check that, because they can.
So comforting but not too stimulating.
Yes.
So not cold, but just not stimulating.
Yes, exactly. One of the other things you need to consider around this time that can sometimes affect sleep is that your child's nutritional needs, your baby's nutritional needs. Most babies, when they reach 6 months, don't really need night feeds, but lots of babies do still have them. If they're feeding well during the day and they're starting on their solid foods, then they generally are getting most of the nutritional needs they need. Some of the questions that were raised in chat room were around babies having a lot of night feeds and not feeding much during the day. That is a bit of a problem because it means that you're having lots of broken sleep.
And then I think that's also tied quite closely to, is the baby feeding because they're hungry, or is the baby feeding because it's that needing that to go to sleep rather than actually being hungry?
There is. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword if you're feeding a lot during the night. I mean, a lot of some mothers don't mind doing that. Other mothers, especially if they're worried about returning to work, and if they're feeding a lot during the night, it raises concern for them. What you're best to do around babies feeding during the night is, first of all, to really try and concentrate on getting feeding during the day working. So it's under either going and seeing your child and family health nurse and understanding how much fluid your baby should be having, or how many breastfeeds they should be having during the day, and also looking at what solid foods your baby's having. And between 6 to 12 months, you can really increase their nutritional intake through the introduction of different types of food, and really certainly be eating really what the family's eating by 10 to 11 months. So it's sort of, it's there's good information on Raising Children Network actually around introduction of solid foods. if you need some help there, if you haven't got a child and family health nurse or don't see your GP. But I suppose it's taking some time to what you might want to, again, like keeping a sleep diary, but keep a diary around what feeding's happening and what it is that, when is most of the feeding happening? Is it happening at night because they're less distracted? So if you're having trouble feeding them during the day, remove them from where all the activity is and go and either feed them their bottle or the breast, perhaps in their bedroom, so that they have the breast, perhaps in their bedroom, so that they have less stimulation. Probably best to try that as a start. We talked a little bit about the development of physical mobility and how that can affect or have an impact your baby's sleep. Not only is it the crawling, but it's the pulling up to standing that often parents will talk about. They'll go in and their baby's standing in their cot, and they can sometimes get themselves up but are having trouble getting themselves down. So they'll need you to get themselves down if they've got themselves up, and eventually they'll learn how to get themselves back down again and back to sleep. So it's when babies are physically mobile, it can impact their sleep. It's the other thing that if they're playing, if they're having good active play, then that will help with sort of their sleep as well. The more that tire them out, if that makes sense, but getting them outside and some into the fresh air, it's good for both you and your baby if you can, if possible, to get out and go for a walk, and just enjoy some fresh air.
And good for your relationship too.
It is good for your relationship. And it's good for your melatonin. So we need sunlight. It's what actually helps us with sleep. So it's important to get out into the sunlight if possible. Doesn't matter how cold it is, especially if you live in Melbourne at the moment. But if you need to rug yourself up and your baby up and get out.
And that's about the day-night routine as well, isn't it? It's very clear that it's daytime because you're outside and you're active. Are we talking about tired signs now, or did you want to talk about?
I might just talk about a little bit about object permanence. Around 6 months, and you probably have noticed that your baby begins to understand what object permanence is, or begins to understand that things are, if they are out of sight, that they still exist. You often see them dropping things out of their high chair, or dropping food, or dropping could be a spoon, and looking at where it's gone. There's also people permanence. Sometimes people talk about people permanence as well. So they'll understand that, if you play a game like peekaboo, that you're still around and that you haven't completely disappeared. So they begin to understand that. And as these months go on, your babies can develop separation anxiety, where they get upset if you leave them or if you're not there. So it's really important to remember that these things are happening. They sometimes can get in the way of settling, and especially at settling time, and might need you to just be a bit more hands-on at those times. There's a few periods of development between 6 to 12 months, and if you follow wonder weeks or some of the other science around emotional development, where the baby's brains are developing rapidly, and they're often at that time become more clingy and will need more attention from you. And
just interrupt you just quickly. We just had a question from Yasmin. What age does object permanence start?
Well, you start to see it around 6 months. Excuse me. But for some babies, it will not be there until about 8 months. So it's a bit fluid. So it depends on the baby. But we start seeing it around 6 months. But like most things, some babies start crawling at 4 months and others crawl at 8 months.
So no exact answer. It's within a range, I guess. And I think that noticing your baby looking for things that they've dropped, or being worried when you leave the room, I guess that would give you an indication of when it started rather than an age, I suppose.
Yes,
Wouldn't it?
exactly.
Looking for the signs.
Yeah. Again, it's about really observing them and keeping an eye out for what's going on. Sometimes when your baby is going through separation anxiety, they might wake a bit more at night, or they don't want to go to sleep. They take a bit longer to settle.
Tired signs, is it?
Yes, I think so.
I think that's really important.
Tired signs. Well, most of you would really be able to probably pick your baby's tired signs now. You probably pick them before everybody else, which is a skill.
Because we've talked about parents being the experts in their own children before, haven't we?
Yeah. Sorry, excuse me.
Good. That's great. I think
as your babies get older, their tired signs can vary a bit, and you'll see babies that might need to be held a bit more or cuddled a bit more. They become less interested in play. You'll notice your baby will sort of get tired of play. They may not want to be picked up more and clingy.
They might be turning away from toys, perhaps, or not making eye contact. I think that's another thing. I'm going to switch to this next slide here because it's a great illustration of what some children do when they're tired. I think I've seen this on raisingchildren.net.au before. The rubbing eyes and the clinginess,
and you'll see babies pulling their ears, getting really red in the face sometimes. You will pick them. You will be able to see your tired signs. The thing about picking tired signs early is it makes it much easier to settle your baby. Because as your children grow older, if the later you pick their tired signs, the more difficult it is to settle them usually. So it's really important to sort of really get an understanding of but it's important to really get an understanding of of what the tired signs are really early, so that you can actually get on top of it. And by observing your children, you'll be able to do that.
Yeah, let's run a poll, Di. I think we've come up time for another poll, and that might give Di a chance to have a drink of water. We're all actually really grateful to Di for coming tonight. She's been getting over a post-viral cough, and I think she's doing really well. So we would like to know, how well do you know your baby's tired signs? And maybe you didn't know they were called tired signs before now, but you probably had an idea about what your child looked like when he or she was tired. We're looking at most of you are the experts in your child, which is great. That's what I think maternal child health nurses and people like Di like to encourage. You guys are the experts, and we, people like Di, can provide some suggestions. So we've got about 60%. We've got another question while the last few people are completing the poll. It's really about that night feeding again. So I wonder if you could answer that.
There's a few people sort of concerned that babies sort of around 10 months are waking for a bottle about 4 a.m. And it's a bit of a challenge, especially when they're going to sleep around 7. I think it's around looking at what's going on in the whole 24 hours. Are they having enough fluids? So not only their milk, but are they drinking plenty of water? And are they having their at least 3 to 4 small meals a day? So it's sort of trying to see what's happening there. If they are waking at 4 a.m. and you feel confident they've had plenty of food and plenty of fluid during the day, then it's it's worth trying to resettle them. And there's different approaches to this. If you don't want to feed them, it's about we do some hands-on settling around offering comfort and trying to get them back to sleep. It's that we haven't talked much about this, but about really telling the difference between your babies. Are they crying or are they grizzling? So if they're waking at 4 a.m. and grizzling, then let them grizzle, because they'll probably try and get themselves back to sleep. If they're screaming the place down, especially if you've got other children, then you really don't want that to happen, and you want them to feel reassured and heard and listened to. So it's about then either changing them and, you know, if they've got a wet nappy, changing the nappy, and then quietly resettling them. We'll look at some information about camping out, but I'll be trying to do some hands-on settling where you're shushing and gently patting them, or just standing there with your hand, one hand on your baby's shoulder and the other hand on their hip, and so that they know you're there, and sort of containing them, making them feel comforted. You could try that, but it's again around looking at the whole 24 hours and seeing how you go and how it all fits in. If they're not getting enough fluids, they will wake up during the night.
Yeah. Okay. What would you like to talk about next, guys? The routine?
Yeah, let's talk about establishing routines. And between 6 to 12 months, if you haven't already, it's a really good time to start establishing some good sleep habits through having a predictable routine. Your routine needs to fit in with your baby, but also with your family. So it's looking at, you know, how is the routine going to fit for both you and your partner? You know, who gets home from work at what time, and how that works. So, you know, you could be looking at establishing a predictable routine that starts around 5, or it could start around 6 or 7, depending on what fits with your family. But whatever time it starts, doesn't really matter. It's just the progression through it needs to be fairly predictable. And remember, this is something that you'll be doing for a few years as your baby grows older, into toddlerhood and then preschool and school. And we know that one of the things really, I suppose, valuable things we can do around promoting good sleep habits is to establish a routine. And these routines can look quite simple, really. You might want to start with a bath. You might, if it's a 6 to 12 months, you might want to start off by giving them their dinner first, because they tend to get food everywhere at this time. So, and then follow with a bath, maybe a massage if you're still massaging your baby. Then their nighttime feed, whether it's a breastfeed or a bottle feed, some quiet play, singing or story time. You might want to flip them around either way. So sometimes people do quiet play, then the feed, and then bed. The thing with ensuring that with the feed at this time of night is not to let your baby go to sleep either on the breast or on the bottle. If you do that, the way they go to sleep when they wake during the night will be where they want to go to sleep again. So they'll go looking for the bottle or the breast at that time. So it's really important to try and get the drowsy baby off your breast or the drowsy baby off the bottle, and put them down either awake or drowsy. They may even just keep chatting to themselves, or they may grizzle a bit while they try to get themselves comfortable. Try not to go in while if they're just grizzling, just let them be. We often fall into the trap, I think, parents, and get tempted to go in as soon as we start hearing them grizzle. But it's best to try and let them try and settle themselves and try and get themselves comfortable and off to sleep. Okay.
Move on a little quicker.
So So when you're settling your baby, it's really important, and the same thing as part of the routine is to speak and use the same consistent messages around sleep when you're settling the baby. We're not sure how much babies understand, although I think the more I have to do with babies, the more I think we underestimate them. But they really do respond to tone and to your actions. So if you're feeling really exhausted and frustrated with your baby, just put them down and leave them, and go out and either have a drink, a cold drink, or a cup of tea, and then go back in when you feel like you can speak and you're not feeling so agitated. Because if you're really having trouble settling, your baby's not responding well, and your anxiety's rising, and you're feeling more frustrated and sometimes angry. I mean, that's not unusual to feel like that. It's important to remove yourself from your baby if you're feeling like that, and go back when you feel like you can actually manage, or get your partner, if you've got one, to help you at those times, or a relative or a friend. But just think about what's happening at that time.
I love this slide because it really speaks to the relationship between the baby and the mum, and I think it reminds you that there are really those beautiful times when your baby's that age, that they're very precious. And I think holding on to the idea that it's the relationship with your baby that's really more important than a lot of the rules or strategies that might work for one person and not another.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to hijack this a little bit now, because I think we're almost we're heading towards question time, and I wonder, are there things that you'd like to get to quicker, or we've had a lot of questions about controlled comforting.
Yeah, we'll move on to that.
I'm just wondering whether that might be an idea. We're aiming for 20 minutes question time, I think. So maybe could we is that right? I think around about 20 minutes question time. And we've had a lot of chatter in the chat room. I'd like to address people's priorities, I guess. So perhaps could we go to control comforting and then see what how much time we've got after that, perhaps, or to those sorts of settling strategies, which is really around what you can do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's a few things you can do. I think probably before we go into controlled comforting, I think it's probably important to think about if you want a different approach, a more gentle approach, maybe responsive, what we call responsive settling.
Yep.
And that's around, when you're trying to settle your baby at night, and of an evening, say, and you've done all your routine, you've been through the routine, you feel like things are going well, and then you pop them down and they don't want to have anything to do with you going going to sleep. They just decide to be restless and cry out. Then with responsive settling, it's about listening to your baby's grizzling. If they're grizzling, don't go in, but if they start to cry, then it's important to go in. You may need to pick them up and reassure them, or you may need to sit there with them and use some hands-on settling around patting and shushing until you'll feel them begin to relax and calm. Now this can take a bit of time, and I think it's not a fast way to settle your baby, but there are periods when this can work. You'll be able to get an inkling of whether it's starting to work after probably about 20 minutes. Generally you can feel your baby relaxing. If they keep crying, then again pick them up, reassure them and pop them down. It is different to controlled comforting, or in ways it's a modification, doesn't use any time. It's using your observation and your ability to see what's going on for your child. If we look at what we call behavioural interventions around settling, there's two interventions that have got some scientific evidence around them, and those are the controlled comforting and camping out.
Mm-hmm.
Camping out, it takes a while, and you can take anywhere between 1 to 3 weeks, sometimes even longer, depending on your child. It's a bit similar to responsive settling, but again, it's a gentle approach. You sit and lie, you take the time to get your baby to know that you're there. You don't leave the room until your baby's asleep. And gradually, over time, you move your chair or your mattress away from your baby's cot and out of the room. If your baby wakes during the night, you return to the chair and would hopefully just settle them. You might need to start with the hands-on and shushing, or you might need to pick the baby up, reassure them, and pop them back down.
Can we go? We've had a question from Narcissa. I think perhaps these terms are new to her: controlled settling, and some of the other phrases that you've used. I think perhaps behavioural techniques and controlled settling and controlled comforting and gentle settling. Like, they're all terms that we might use a lot, but it might be very overwhelming for some of these parents with sort of sleep deprivation to get them all in their head straight.
Well, controlled settling or controlled comforting is a method that was developed and was tested here in Victoria with a scientific trial, and it uses the time. It uses a time-based intervention, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of detail around it on the Raising Children Network and instructions on how to do it. It's not advisable to use with babies until at least 8 months. It can be used with 6 months, but most of the time we wouldn't advise people to use it until the baby's at least 8 months old. They need to have a really good understanding of parental presence, that their parent will come back. When we talk about gentle settling or gentle comforting, gentle settling, gentle sleep techniques, they are more around techniques that where there's not so much crying. The reality is with controlled settling or controlled comforting, there can be quite a bit of crying involved, and you'll be able to see that by looking at the Raising Children Network site. There's more detail around that. What was the other?
I think that's covered it. I think you've really clarified the difference between the camping out and the controlled comforting and the gentle settling, which was more the hands-on, feeling your baby relax, rather than walking around and rocking or pushing in the pram. It's just having them in the cot and being there with them, settling them calmly. Have I got that right?
Yes, you have. Great. I mean, the reality is, I know a lot of parents probably will take their babies to bed with them to resettle at times. And although, I think in reality parents do it, although it's not advised, and certainly Red Nose, which is the authority in Australia around sudden infant death syndrome, really doesn't advise that sort of practice. It's important that if you're going to have your baby in bed with you, you need to follow a whole lot of practices, and they're on the Red Nose site, and it's really around what sort of bedding you've got and what sort of
no pets, no siblings in the bed,
no drug use, no alcohol, that sort. There's a whole lot of different, and if you Google Red Nose, it'll come up and it will help you with understanding what not to do in relation to bed sharing with your baby. But I understand that a lot of parents, through exhaustion, do it, and so it's just trying to do it in a safe way.
Got a few more minutes, perhaps. Would you like to talk about parents?
Yeah, I think it's important to talk about parents.
I think so too.
Look, I think it's really common for parents to feel fatigued, especially by 6 months. generally feel fatigued, especially by 6 months. Generally starts to settle down after 6 months. Well, if your baby starts to extend their periods of sleeping at night. We often talk about babies sleeping through the night. Now, if your baby sleeps in an 8-hour block, you're doing really well. For a baby to sleep from 7 o'clock at night till 6 a.m. in the morning, they're doing extremely well. Some babies will do it all the time. It's just how they are programmed. But the majority of, well, at least a third of babies will wake a lot more often. The fatigue that parents have, we often just accept, but I think it's really important to be aware how it affects your everyday life. And I don't know whether people just don't, I don't think we think twice about getting in a car and driving, even though we're incredibly fatigued. There's a lot of things we do without thinking, even though we are fatigued as parents. So one of the things for parents to be able to do that is really helpful, I think, is to learn to ask for help. Is to develop a practice of help seeking, and it's calling on relatives, friends. We talk about children being raised in villages or communities. We've got to get better at doing it. I think so too. And sometimes there's a culture about admitting that things are really hard can be seen as a failure, and we have to start looking at that as being a sign of courage in parents. That admitting that this is really tough and that I need help is a positive thing. If you're fortunate and have family around you, it's often who are willing to help. It's often much easier. For a lot of parents, they're isolated. So it's I think as young parents, if you know other young parents, and see how you can help each other. Try not to measure each other's performance as parents. Try not to, one of the ways we seem to do that is by saying, the first thing we all say to each other is, how many hours did your baby sleep last night? But really, a successful parenting is having a really good relationship with your child as they get older. It's not actually, when you look back, looking about how much sleep they had. But try to ask for help when you need it. Find a good GP or find a good child and family health nurse who you feel able to talk to, or talk to good family members or friends who will not judge you, or and who are willing to help.
And when should you ask for help?
Whenever you need it.
Don't wait till you're on the edge, perhaps.
No. If from the very beginning, when people sort of say, what can I do? Say, oh no, don't say everything's fine. Say, you can cook me a meal, or you can come around and watch the baby for an hour while I have a sleep. So it's when with parent fatigue, try and practice having some sleep if your baby's asleep.
I'm going to switch to our questions line now, Guy. I have kept note of a couple of issues that quite a few people have been asking. One of them is around changes to sleep patterns. So a lot of people are concerned that they've put some changes in and they've worked, and then at a certain time, it's almost like they call it sleep regression. Is that a term that you would use, sleep regression, or is it a developmental?
No, I probably wouldn't call it sleep regression. There are periods, what we call periods of natural regression, or periods of of big emotional changes in babies within the between 6 to 12 months, and those periods generally match up with rapid brain development. So there's big changes in the baby's brain. If you look at your baby between 5 to 6 months, all of a sudden their head gets bigger, their brain is growing, and that sometimes seems to unravel babies. I'm not sure why, but it just seems to. And a baby that's been sleeping really well will sometimes start waking more often and need more company and need you, the parent, to help them resettle. They can be more clingy at those times. Some people use Wonder Weeks to track that sort of thing, but there's other information. The child development on the RCM website's good for that.
So we're actually talking about development rather than regression, aren't we?
We are. It's sort of an unfortunate term, but it's just that the wheels seem to fall off at times. And I mean, it's the same. Often we can get our babies to be sleeping really well, and then they'll get a cold. And then the wheels fall off. Or you might take them. You might go on holidays, and the wheels fall off.
It's about that with the routine getting put out, isn't it? Oh, that's interesting. One of the other sort of issues that's come up, and it's interesting, it wasn't the same question, but the issue was catnapping. And we had some audience members wanting to know how to stop catnapping, but we had other questions around how do I make my baby sleep better during the day. So perhaps we could talk generally about daytime naps, and also perhaps when you would expect them to stop.
Well, daytime naps babies do not drop their daytime naps generally until they're about, at least, still having one around 2. So you'd hope that they're still having at least one sleep around 18 months. I mean, with daytime naps, I think it's the same as in the evening. It's important to have the similar routine that they begin to understand. I mean, it shouldn't cripple your social life or stop you from going out. I think it's really important for mothers and fathers' health and well-being to get out with your babies. You want to have some flexibility around the way you parent, so you're not just housebound. It's good that if your baby can sleep, in a porta cot or in a cot or in a pram, as long as you supervise them asleep in a pram. But it's within the daytime naps. If you find your baby's napping and they're waking after about 30 to 40 minutes, and they're waking in a sleep cycle, what you can do with those babies that are doing that, if you're pretty sure that that's what's happening, go in before they wake up and then try and settle them through that wakeful period back to sleep again. It works for some babies. It doesn't happen. You do that by going in and just shushing and resettling them. I think it's worth a try to do that. It's one of the small things you can do.
Just to get them over that
But generally between 6 to 12 months, your babies still need at least 2 sleeps a day. Some babies will have like 45-minute nap, an hour nap, and 30 minutes late in the afternoon. And they'll work quite well with that. Others won't. So if you can get your baby to have fairly decent naps, say an hour or an hour and a half in the morning, an hour in the afternoon, you'll be able to tell whether they're having enough sleep, again, by their behaviour and their general demeanour. Are they content? Are they happy? Are they feeding well?
Getting to know your baby all over again, isn't it? Like that point keeps coming up and up again. It's your relationship with your baby. I'm really picking up on that. Great. We had a few questions around routine. I know the slide that you put up earlier was about a settling routine for night. So that was about the bath. So these questions were a little bit different. They were about, Tennille had one about settling the child to sleep in a different environment like childcare. Shay had a question about what to do if you have an irregular daytime schedule, or perhaps an older sibling like a toddler who doesn't sleep during the day. So just that daytime, you're a busy mum and you want your child to sleep at a certain time, but it's a bit difficult with the other things that are happening.
Well, that's around developing some adaptability and flexibility with your child. But if they're then getting really overtired, then it's sort of working out how to manage that. In relation to childcare, it's really important, if your child's going into care and education facilities, to work with the childcare educators to get them to understand what your routine is at home and what you want as a parent in relation to the care of your baby. It's supposed to be a partnership, so it's really important for you to speak up. Most early childhood facilities really want to know what you want for your child while they're in their care. They're quite accommodating. A lot of children will sleep on mattresses on the floor, or they'll put themselves to bed these days, or they'll sleep in their cot. So it's about communication and making sure that you speak to the educators and get them to understand what you're really wanting for your baby.
I'm going to just ask one more question, which I hope will perhaps answer some of the other questions that have come up in the chat room around how do you get your baby to, or how do you extend the sleep cycle, or those sorts of, how can I help my baby do this? This was another question from earlier when people registered, which was from Emma, and I loved it. How much is actually in your control as a parent to get your child to fall asleep and stay asleep?
There's some control, but there's so many also variables around your baby settling, and some of that's around their own brain development, around all the biological things that need to happen in the brain that help your baby with resettling and with sleep. But there's the other things around ensuring that when you are putting your baby down, that they are comfortable, that they're dry, that they're warm or cool depending on what the weather's like, that they're in an environment that is actually suitable for sleep in a darkened room, so that and that the whole lead up to them going to sleep is calm and prepared around sleep. So
it's about just knowing what you can control and providing the best environment and the best circumstances. And some things you can't control, and that's when you get help, I guess.
It is, especially if it's bothering you, go and get help. I mean, some parents don't worry about these things and others do. We're all different, and neither's right or wrong, but it is knowing when to get help. It's really understanding what is part of normal or expected development of children and babies, and often if we understand what's happening, it's much easier to deal with what we actually then experience.
We've got another webinar coming up with Di on the 18th of September with Di. It's a toddler sleep and settling webinar. I notice some of you in the comments have older siblings of your babies.
Yes.
So I guess that will extend their learning as well, and I think there'll be a whole lot of other issues as well that would come up with toddlers.
A continual change. So from babies to toddlers to preschoolers to school-age children to before you know it, they're adolescents. So
then they have children of their own, and then your grandparents looking after your kids' children.